She lived across the street. Then she started living inside my head. When I first moved here, I told myself the silence would be good for me. The street was narrow and still, lined with small brick townhomes that all looked like they'd been pressed from the same mold. I could hear my footsteps echo against the concrete as I carried boxes from the van to the door. No kids playing, no dogs barking, just the soft rush of wind sliding down the row of houses. I was running from something, though I wouldn't have called it that at the time. Burnout, heartbreak, months of waking up in the middle of the night to stare at the ceiling. My old life had been a constant thrum of noise, and I thought maybe, in this place, I'd be able to hear myself think again. The first morning was bright and cold. I stood in my kitchen with a chipped mug in both hands, warming my fingers, and looked out the front window. That's when I saw her. She was in her own window, directly across from mine, holding a mug just like mine in the exact same way, fingers curved over the top as if cradling the steam. She raised her hand in a small wave. It was friendly enough, but there was something in the way she held my gaze, like she'd been waiting for me to look up. I waved back and turned away. By evening, the boxes were still half unpacked. I wandered from room to room, noting the small noises that seemed louder in the emptiness, the hollow thump of the fridge door closing, the whisper of air through the vents. I brushed my teeth in the upstairs bathroom and happened to glance out the narrow window above the sink. She was there again, brushing her teeth, same rhythm, same tilt of the head. For a second, it almost felt like looking into a mirror, but her bathroom light was softer, her walls a slightly different color. We met eyes through the glass, and she smiled. Not sheepishly, not like she'd been caught, more like she was acknowledging something. I backed away from the window, the toothbrush still in my mouth. The next day, I decided to test it. I dug through an unpacked box and found a scarf I almost never wore. Mustard yellow, too loud for me. At exactly 11:13 a.m., I stepped outside to get some air. She appeared minutes later, locking her car, wearing a scarf the same exact shade. She didn't look at me, but she didn't have to. My pulse kicked up in my throat. Over the next few days, it kept happening. I made spaghetti for lunch. She sat in her window twirling the same noodles. I left my hair down. Hers was suddenly loose too, even though I'd only ever seen it tied up before. I started avoiding the windows, keeping the blinds drawn, but still, I felt her there. It all might have stayed as a weird neighborhood coincidence, if not for the note. It was a Thursday morning, pale and overcast. I opened the mirrored cabinet in my bathroom to grab my anxiety pills, the ones I hadn't touched in months, and there it was, a sticky note, damp at the edges from condensation. 4 words. "You're throwing me off." I froze. The cabinet had been closed all night. The bathroom door had been locked. I always locked it, even when I was alone. I checked the rest of the house. Front door locked, windows latched, no signs of anyone inside. But that note. I peeled it off with trembling fingers and flushed it down the toilet. The yellow paper swirled into the water, the black ink bleeding into something unrecognizable. Still, the words lingered. "You're throwing me off." It was the first time I realized she wasn't just copying me. She was paying attention to the times I didn't follow the pattern. After the note, I tried to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe it wasn't from her. Maybe the landlord had left it months ago for some previous tenant, and I just hadn't noticed. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The next day, I decided to test her again, only this time in public. There was a cafe on the edge of the neighborhood I'd never been to. I left at a random time, no routine she could track, and ordered something I'd never had before, an oat milk cappuccino with cinnamon. It was an impulsive choice, made silently as I stood in line, my eyes skimming the menu. I sat at a corner table by the window, sipping slowly, watching the clouds stretch thin above the rooftops. A few minutes later, the door opened. She walked in. No coat, no bag, like she'd just stepped out of her front door and followed a string only she could see. She didn't look at me. She went straight to the counter and said, "Oat milk cappuccino, cinnamon on top." The barista rang her up like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. She picked up the cup, turned toward the door, and as she passed my table, she leaned slightly, just enough for me to hear her whisper, "Next time, try vanilla." She was gone before I could speak. That night, I closed every blind and unplugged my phone. I cooked dinner in silence, the only sound the hiss of oil in the pan. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling she was eating too, somewhere across from me, every motion mirrored. The dreams started soon after. The first one was almost harmless. I was walking through my apartment, except everything was reversed, like the image in a mirror. The furniture was there, but slipped. My books were stacked in reverse order. Even the grain in the wooden floors ran the wrong way. Somewhere beyond the walls, I could hear someone breathing. Slow, steady, and deep, like they were matching my lungs on purpose. When I exhaled, they inhaled. When I stopped, so did they. I woke with the taste of copper in my mouth, and my sheets twisted tight around me. A week later, the second dream came. This time, I wasn't alone in the mirrored apartment. She was there, though I never saw her face directly. I only caught glimpses, a shoulder vanishing around a corner, a hand sliding out of sight, the faint echo of footsteps when I turned my head. In the dream, I found myself speaking, except the voice wasn't mine. It was hers. I woke, gasping, the sound still lodged in my ears, like I'd been breathing with someone else's lungs. By then, the notes were everywhere. One on my windshield, "You looked sad today." One slipped under my door, "Still pretending?" One tucked into the folds of my blanket, "I like when you're honest." Honest about what? One evening, I came home from the grocery store and found my notebook on the kitchen counter. The same notebook I kept hidden in a drawer under layers of clothes. It was open to a page I hadn't written. The handwriting was neat, unfamiliar. "I can hear you even when you don't speak." My skin crawled. I tore the page out and burned it over the sink, watching the flame curl the edges inward. For the next few days, I tried to keep my mind as blank as possible. No stray thoughts, no memories. I listened to white noise through headphones. I filled my hours with meaningless, mechanical tasks. It didn't matter. One afternoon, I was washing dishes, thinking about how lonely I'd become, how the silence was beginning to press down on me. I didn't say it out loud. I barely let the words form in my head. The next morning, I heard her outside, talking on the phone. "I don't even feel like I exist anymore unless someone else is watching me," she said. My exact thought, word for word. I stood frozen by the sink, my wet hands dripping onto the tile. It was the first time I wondered if maybe I hadn't just moved next to her. Maybe she'd been here the whole time. I stopped thinking of her as my neighbor. That word implied distance, a wall, boundaries. There weren't any anymore. I tried leaving. No plan, no notice. I just packed a bag one night and walked out to my car, leaving my phone behind like it could anchor me here. It was after 2 in the morning. The street was empty, the rows of houses slouched under a low sky. I drove until the townhouses and streetlights thinned into stretches of unlit highway. By dawn, I'd reached a roadside diner, the kind that smells of old coffee and fried batter, even from the parking lot. I slid into a booth at the back and stared at the sticky laminate menu without really seeing it. The waitress came by, hair piled in a loose bun. She set down a chipped mug and said, "Someone told me you might stop by." I looked up. Who? She tilted her head toward the far side of the diner, and there she was, sitting in a booth alone, her hands wrapped around a mug like always. No coat, no bag, no surprise on her face. I left without paying. I don't remember the drive, only that I ended up somewhere wooded, far from any road. My clothes were damp with dew, my cheeks scraped raw like I'd fallen. When I finally returned home, the front door was locked, the windows latched, everything exactly as I'd left it, except for the kitchen counter. My notebook was sitting there, open to a page in her handwriting. "You can't leave yourself behind." That night, I smashed what electronics I had left. I burned my journals in a metal bowl in the sink, watching the ash spiral in the draft from the vent. I told myself if I cut off every channel, no screens, no recordings, no words on paper, she'd have nothing left to steal. But it didn't stop. Sometimes I'd catch myself standing in the middle of a room, holding something I didn't remember picking up. My hair tied back when I hadn't touched it, my clothes changed without memory of changing them. And sometimes I'd hear my own voice, but wrong, like the echo of a sentence spoken somewhere else, a fraction of a second before I said it. The dreams turned violent. I'd be back in that mirrored apartment, except now there were cracks in the floor and black water leaking through. I'd see her silhouette just beyond the doorway, watching me without moving. When I woke, my body would ache as if I'd been standing in one position for hours. The night she came inside, there was no sound of the door opening. One moment, I was sitting on the floor against the wall. The next, she was in the doorway to my living room, barefoot, still. She looked at me like I was the reflection and she was the original. "It's harder when you go blank," she said softly. She walked past me toward the front door and let herself out. The latch clicked quietly, like she lived here. I sat there for hours, my mind humming with static, unable to decide if she'd actually been inside or if I just stood up, walked to the door, and imagined her leaving. The next day, I searched online for anything, stories, rumors, something to tell me what she was. Buried in old message board archives, I found a thread about mirror-smith houses. Supposedly, in the 70s, some were built in pairs, identical layouts mirrored across a shared wall, with plans for hidden observation glass that was never officially installed. A handful of ex-tenants claimed their opposite neighbor copied their every move until they left, or lost track of which side was theirs. No photos, no proof, just warnings, and one line that made my stomach knot. It's not about watching, it's about sinking. Once they match you, they can take the lead. I didn't knock. By then, knocking felt like pretending there were still rules. Her front door was unlocked, the handle cold under my palm. I stepped inside and stopped breathing. It was my apartment, not just the same layout, the same details. The scratch in the coffee table from when I dropped a key ring, the fray in the edge of the rug I always caught my toe on. Even the faint water ring on the nightstand from a glass I'd set down 2 weeks ago. Everywhere I looked, there was proof this was mine, except I knew I'd never been here before. The air smelled faintly of my laundry detergent and the lavender spray I used on my pillow. In the kitchen, the same mug sat drying on the rack. In the living room, the throw blanket was bunched the way I'd left it that morning. I walked down the hall to the bedroom. The bed was unmade, my comforter, my sheets. On the desk by the window was my notebook, or hers, open to a page filled with my handwriting. Except it wasn't mine. Every letter was too precise, every curve a little too deliberate. Against the far wall, a section of paneling was slightly ajar. I pulled it open. Behind it was dark glass. Not a mirror, a sheet of black so deep it seemed to swallow light. My reflection was there, faint and distorted, like I was looking through water. But as I leaned closer, the reflection smiled before I did. A sound behind me. I turned. She was in the doorway, closer than I'd ever seen her. I noticed things I shouldn't have. The fleck in her left iris that matched mine exactly. The same faint scar along the hairline from when I fell off my bike at 8. Even the slight crook at the corner of her smile was perfect. My smile. "I don't want to disappear," she said. Her voice was my voice. I stepped back, but the black glass was right behind me, pressing cold against my spine. I could feel it humming faintly, almost like a second heartbeat. "You've been fighting me," she went on. "You make it harder than it has to be." I shook my head. "You're not me." She tilted hers. "Then who am I?" I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My body felt heavy, like the air itself was holding me in place. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered the line from the message board. Once they match you, they can take the lead. I started speaking, fast, desperate, listing things only I should know. My first pet's name, the smell of my mother's perfume, the way the ocean looked the day my brother nearly drowned. Memories like an exorcism. But as I said them, her lips moved too, matching every word, every inflection. She was inside them as much as I was. I lunged forward, shoving past her into the hull, flipping picture frames as I went, dragging the rug into a heap, pulling books from shelves. My heart was pounding so loud it was all I could hear. If I broke the pattern, if I made enough chaos, maybe I could shake her loose. She didn't follow. She just stood in the bedroom doorway, watching with that almost smile. I burst out her front door and stumbled across the yard into my own. I slammed the door, locked it, and pressed my back against it until my breathing slowed. The house was exactly as I'd left it that morning, but as I walked through the rooms, I noticed small things. The couch cushion on the wrong side, the mug in the sink turned the opposite way, my comforter folded differently. By the time I reached the bedroom, my skin was crawling. I caught sight of myself in the dark window, and I smiled. It took me a heartbeat too long to realize the muscles in my face hadn't moved yet. I don't know which one of us survived. I think I did.
You've made it to the end, and I'm glad you stayed. Some stories fade when the fire burns low. Others stay with you, long after the flames die. If you're not ready to step back into the dark just yet, there's another story waiting. You can subscribe so you don't miss it. Stay by the fire. It's safer here.